Madam President, I rise in opposition today to President Trump's continued efforts to move funding from our military in order to build his beloved wall on our southern border. And I rise as well in defense of the powers given to Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution. Last week, the President announced he was taking $3.6 billion from America's military to build his wall. He did so by canceling 127 military construction projects around the world and in 26 states and territories. Already, President Trump has taken $2.5 billion from our military earlier this year. Last week's decision brings the total to over $6 billion. $6 billion of investments in our American military and national security that the President of the United States has diverted so that he can have a bragging point in the re-election campaign about his beloved wall. This decision has ripped across the country and the world. Remember the terrible damage that Hurricane Maria did in Puerto Rico, which is still being repaired? Our military prioritized $400 million to rebuild National Guard facilities and the school for military children there. With the stroke of a pen and without the approval of Congress, the President took away these funds. Joint Base Andrews in Maryland needed a new child care facility for military families. Some of the rooms in that current facility have been closed due to mold, which has created overcrowding. There are 130 children on a waiting list to get in this facility. Their parents are paying for expensive off-base child care. It's unacceptable. So Congress, on behalf of these military families at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, approved the money to upgrade the Child Care Center. Once again, with the stroke of the pen, President Trump took the military family child care funds for his almighty wall. Military children at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the home state of the Republican majority leader of the Senate, are forced to use overcrowded classrooms and a cafeteria so small that students are often shipped off to the library to eat. With the same stroke of a pen, $62 million that Congress authorized for Senator McConnell's home state of Kentucky to fix the problem is gone, headed to the border of the United States for the President to be able to boast at a rally. As if these stories weren't troubling enough, the Air Force is also sounding the alarm. A leaked internal review by the Air Force warns that President Trump's decision to cancel 51 Air Force projects poses serious national security risks to our country. Imagine if the shoe were on the other foot and the President were a member of my party, the Democratic Party. What would we be hearing from the Republican side of the aisle? One of the projects that's been canceled for the Air Force by the President's effort to divert military funds to his wall is Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. They needed an upgrade for security on their main gate. The Air Force says that without this project, and I quote, "The base is vulnerable to hostile penetration in the midst of contingency operations and an increased terrorist threat." For goodness sakes, the President is building a wall in the middle of a desert that is not solving the problem we face with our southern border and taking money away from the main gate of an Air Force base in Turkey that's been identified to rebuild their gate for security against terrorism. The report also describes how canceling upgrades to munition sites at an air base in Guam may impact the ability of fighter and bomber aircraft to operate properly. I ask my colleagues honestly, are these risks worth taking from our military so the President can have a walk-off line at one of his political rallies? U.S. allies across the globe who are committed to our defense are starting to doubt if this White House is still interested in being a leader in the free world. U.S. troops based in NATO ally countries like Poland, Italy, Germany, and Estonia expected $770 million in investments in training center and logistical support to push back on Russian aggression in Europe. I can tell you, having visited the Baltic states, how critically important these funds are to remind the people of that region that the United States and NATO allies still stand solidly behind them as Putin threatens them with aggression on a daily basis. And now President Trump has removed many of these funds. Similarly, U.S. troops in South Korea and Japan were planning on $670 million to protect them from threats from North Korea and China. The cancellation of all these projects is based on a national emergency declared by the President that was rejected by both houses of Congress in bipartisan votes. Congress should not be silent when anyone dismisses the real needs of our men and women in uniform for politics. Nor should it sit back when the President of any party tries to undermine its constitutional duty to provide for the common defense of the United States. I am greatly concerned that these events set a precedent that undermines the Appropriations Committee, which I have dedicated my Senate career to. We all remember President Donald Trump's idea that we needed a 2,000-mile concrete wall, as he said, from sea to shining sea, paid for by Mexico. He said it 200 times when he campaigned for the office of president. But as we've seen, Mexico hasn't put up a peso. The president's decided that the American military should pay for it instead. The resulting damage to our military and to the Appropriations Committee constitutional authority continues to accumulate. It has to stop. And it can stop if my colleagues on both sides of the aisle can come together to reassert their obligations under the Constitution and provide our military families with certainty that they haven't been forgotten in the midst of the run-up to the 2020 campaign. I hope that all of us think long and hard about the importance of this decision and our obligation to stand behind our men and women in the military. Madam President, I yield the floor.